It was 1992, and my sister had just come back from a semester at Amherst. Up until then, I had been merely a big fan of hip hop and R&B and really into the culture. But when she came back, she brought with her a crate of CDs that, for the first time, really challenged what I knew about music. As I looked through some of those CDs and started to pop them in and listen to Courtney Love start screaming and Black Francis go on about some javelina somewhere, I started to fall in love because I began to understand that there was something happening inside of me, which I couldn't name at the time, but I had always known there was a shift and I could feel it. And what I felt was my central nervous system recalibrating and fixing itself in real time as I was listening to a lot of these songs. KROQ, if you grew up here in the 1990s and if you grew up here in Los Angeles, was responsible for introducing the world to music that has gone on to become legendary. Through KROQ, education was occurring in real time. We weren't just listening to music, we were being trained psychologically, and our central nervous system was being trained through the music being delivered. The producers and engineers at that time were probably more responsible for that grunge sound than any of the acts that went on to reap the benefits and the rewards. Nirvana could not happen without Butch Vig. Pearl Jam does not work without Brendan O'Brien. Under the Bridge is just a poem without Rick Rubin. And Mind Riot is just the ramblings of a really disturbed person without Terry Date. As we come to the first week of June and start to plan our summer playlists, I want to revisit the early 1990s, my childhood, and talk about alternative music, grunge music, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, the bands that really shaped my life, and speak about them in terms of psychodynamic theory as they exist in the field today, to really be able to give you a good example through the music what psychodynamic theory looks like. Because when you go to therapy, there is a lot of choices out there. And there is, for instance, PrecisionCycle, which I offer, but there are other modalities. We're going to go through them looking at the music of the time, which is grunge, and how 6 producers created this personality spectrum that at that time we didn't know we were being affected by, but our central nervous systems were being recalibrated in real time because of therapy these songs were able to give us. Among them, Butch Vig, who will be presented as a therapist, Steve Albini, who has the Lacanian personality, Rick Rubin, the Jungian archetype, Brendan O'Brien, the classic CBT practitioner, Terry Date, the DBT operator, and finally, Dave Jerden, the humanistic nihilist. Looking at these 6 producers, engineers, we're going to see what psychodynamic theory looks like in practice. If you want to feel its effects, you can refer to some of those songs on the playlist. This is going to be crazy. I'm Enrique. This is Elevate.epo. Let's open it up. The real story of grunge isn't just the frontman. It's not the driving bass. It's not the pounding drums and the snares. It's not even the flannel, the melancholia. None of that. It is the engineers, the people who were able to really build the emotional infrastructure that made those songs what they are. What if we were able to sit here and really appreciate these practitioners and these professionals for being accidental therapists and finding ways to soothe our central nervous systems in ways that can maybe act as blueprints for us moving forward? And so I mentioned the 6 archetypes that we'll be looking at. Butch Vig, the Winnicottian, Albini, the Lacanian, Rubin, the Jungian, O'Brien, the CBT practitioner, Date, the DBT operator, and Jerden, the humanistic nihilist. And without further ado, let's get into it. So Butch Vig, who is he? He's a producer, produced Nevermind, one of the most seminal pieces of rock and roll grunge of our time, is arguably the album that produced Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is credited for putting grunge on the map, making it acceptable and palatable to MTV viewers. He is a representation of the Winnicottian therapist because he represents the good enough parent concept. And if you read Winnicott, what he talks about is there's a good enough mother, there's a good enough father. He was arguing that parents don't need to be perfect. They just need to be responsive to the infant's needs. It allows the child to experience necessary illusion of omnipotence, where they feel their needs are met instantly, followed by disillusionment as the mother occasionally fails to be perfect. And then that creates the splitting, right? We have the good mom, the bad mom. Butch Vig shows us that you can present yourself, come as you are, because we have lithium that can sort you out. You don't have to be the best. You can just present good enough. I am the good enough parent. And as you come and present yourself as you are, I can then make up the difference with other types of elements that I can augment here. For instance, I can make up the difference with studio effects and doubling guitars and other types of things that I can manipulate outside of the actual physical recorded field so that I can create a much richer and deeper sound. That is a polished studio album way of thinking and delivering that he utilized to go on to do with the Smashing Pumpkins and then his project with Garbage. But that has always been his approach. And what that leads to is the ability to really distinguish between what Winnicott talks about, the true self, which is the spontaneous, authentic self, and then the false self, which is the rehearsed, developed self, which is presented oftentimes when we have to manage stressful situation. This is the classic code switching that occurs. And if we look at it from a Kurt Cobain Nevermind production standpoint, Kurt Cobain was able to tap into that false self and express it because he used Butch as the transitional object to heal whatever internal relational component he was struggling with. We saw what occurred long term, but for the moment, Butch Vig was able to capture the genius of Kurt Cobain through allowing him to present himself as he was and not challenging, shaming, or speaking to any of the elements that had forced him into this false self narrative. And so as we see Cobain go through his arc, we see how he has his rupture and his inability to deal with that false self. The way Butch Vig presents him is a mirroring modern field theory-based psychodynamic theorists to present with that good enough parent framework. They can add other elements to try to see if there's some kind of recalibration. Oftentimes that never occurs though, because there's so much holding that has to occur. You end up with this false sense of self, but that looks really good. And that sounds really good and is now being palatable in society. That is therapy to a T. We're not going to deal with the originating wounds or trauma. We're just going to hold your space and listen to you process without ever going deeper. And we're going to make you tolerable in public spaces through some type of ability to offload a lot of this affect that will never really get sorted out. But as long as we maintain this offloading of affect style by you coming in weekly for years, you can manage to live this very, what you think is an authentic life, but what your body is crying out loud is not authentic. And so we saw the break that happened with Nirvana. And as we see that arc work its way through to In Utero, by the time that Kurt Cobain and Nirvana decided they wanted to record In Utero, they had enough of the studio polish and decided they wanted to go with someone who was going to just be capturing the raw emotion. And Steve Albini made a career out of that, not so much being a music producer, being a sound engineer, being the type of person who knows where to put a microphone, at what length from a speaker cabinet or effects box to capture reality, the pain of all that is occurring. And if you listen to In Utero, that is an album which from beginning to end speaks to Kurt's acceptance of the fact that his career has been nothing more than a sham to make people rich. And there is no way out without him having to undertake some control measures. But the reality being that this entire arc has really left him with an inability to reconcile any type of positive emotion that gives him hope and allows him to move forward. Albini captured that in all of its essence with no polish, no filter. And that's why In Utero is considered the most real album of the collection. He mic'd up the wound and he presented the wound to the world. He didn't touch it. He didn't have to interpret it. Like Lacan, the subject present the content, which then created the tapestry to understand what was real, symbolic, and imaginary. We saw that a lot of symbology that lived in the real, which mitigated fears that exist in the imaginary. For Kurt Cobain, which you hear plainly in that album. Even before that, when you were looking at Surfer Rosa with the Pixies, Steve Albini, 1988, again, a lot of the same themes of this is our pain, this is what we're presenting to the world, this is our isolation for you to consume, make the interpretation of what you will. This is our reality, this is our symbology, this is our imagination. Lacan really talks a lot about the mirroring and boundary formation that exists in the world. We see here and throughout the entire production of In Utero that the mirroring, as Kurt Cobain presents it, is that of somebody is pathologized, someone whose joy has been taken away from him, and the only thing that does give him joy is now subject to mass scrutiny because society has decided that people who utilize drugs to manage their pain are somehow morally bankrupt. He's speaking to that isolation, and Steve Albini doesn't try to fix any of it. He just captures it and looks to stay curious as to what's occurring, but present the pain in a way that makes it visceral and real. And that is Lacan and Albini, the ability to capture the unsalvageable beauty of the counter-transference and transference phenomenon, where the real pain lives. That for someone who's a psychodynamic nerd like me, that creates that spectrum that is present when you go to a higher educational university endeavor and you have people that see the world a certain way, people who want to hold space and present you for being good enough, people that want to just gawk and stare at the dysfunction and theorize, right? The poles of the spectrum. And within that, we come to another person, for instance, like Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin had worked a lot in hip hop and R&B, having worked with Public Enemy, he worked with the Beastie Boys, but it wasn't until he worked with the Red Hot Chili Peppers on Blood Sugar Sex Magic where he really found his voice as a rock and roll icon and deliverer of real rock and roll talent. And he was able to see that Anthony Kiedis was somebody who fit an archetype that just needed to be aligned so that the narrative could begin. He took Anthony Kiedis' words in Under the Bridge, which is a very personal story about heroin use and pain associated with that, loss. He glamorized it. And he told Flea, I want you to play a bass line that is so funky and limbically priming that whenever it comes on, people are going to know exactly what it is. I want John Frusciante to play this melody in E chord that ends with the Jimi Hendrix chord, which just gives you that sense of, whoa, what's this? Because limbically, viscerally, I want you to tap into that thing inside of you, that preloaded software that's going to make you react and deliver a song which essentially says that suffering looks good in a silhouette. That is Rick Rubin. That is Carl Jung in a nutshell. The archetypes, the restraint, the myth making that's created through that. Anthony Kiedis became larger than life because Rick Rubin was able to tap into the archetypes that people could consume him and project him into, and Anthony Kiedis could project himself into himself. This is Jungian theory at its whole. What were we predestined to become? How do we align ourselves by understanding what our ancestral architecture leads us to? That is the structure of all the mysticism oftentimes. That is, you sit down with Jungians and they're always talking about alchemy, mystics and whatnot, but at their core, any persona data that you're going to do in corporate work, whether that's academic or professional, it's all based on understanding personalities. We can look at Jung's writings as a foundation of understanding personalities. At their core, we're tapping into the preloaded software packages that our ancestors have put within us. And because of that, Anthony Kiedis, and through the music, we're not necessarily ever dealing with the pain. We're just looking to process and hold it the way that our ancestral architecture would, whether that be through the fighter, the king, the queen, the court jester, the mystic. These are all things that Rick Rubin is able to tap into. When he says he's a tastemaker, that's exactly why, because he understands how people instinctually align themselves from a personality architecture perspective. Brendan O'Brien, I call him the CBT practitioner because he's a very cookie cutter act at this point, because it did get rather soulless. You move away from some of the things that, for instance, was moving in Jeremy and I'm Still Alive and definitely Black, Even Flow, two songs that are a little bit more just generic and formulaic, Daughter, Animal. These are just repeating patterns until they have a rupture and a break. This is CBT Albert Ellis in a nutshell, the forward motion of behavioral recalibration. If I can get you to start behaving differently, even without understanding why, what the desire to move or to behave that way to begin with is and why it serves a purpose, that's all we need to know. We don't have to sit around waiting for the theorists to give us a reason why we do things. We just need to change them to align with social outcomes the best way possible. It makes you boring. It takes away from your authenticity, and it makes your social commentary and political commentary that Eddie Vedder went on after delivering 10. It makes it a little bit less meaningful because it's more palatable now and not as shocking. Even though he does slick up things, he does it with studio effects that make things harder. And if you listen again to 10, that is a much harder and heavier album, I think. But O'Brien does a good job. And as we sat there listening to the music, our cognitive behavioral components of our central nervous systems began to change and recalibrate and began to get us mellower, more contained. And this is the benefits of that. We see that CBT perspective. If we want to take that further, Marsha Linehan took the concepts of CBT and understood that from a human evolutionary standpoint, if dialectic behavior was something that really was effective for challenging thoughts at their core. That way we can implement mindful and grounding techniques without having to recalibrate our behaviors. We could do that real time in our head. Easier said than done, works for people. And Harry Date is someone who very effectively was able to do that. Soundgarden with groups like Sound, Chris Cornell working on songs like Mind Riot, Outshine, Jesus Christ Pose. We see how he is able to have these real moments in real time and really seek to recalibrate. Looking California and feeling Minnesota, that is DBT at its core. I want this particular outcome, but I feel this particular way. So what can I do to bridge that gap so that I can at the very least have some comfort and not go crazy here? Mind Riot, speaking to that later on in the album. Harry Date allowed Chris Cornell and the rest of the band to really answer that question. What if your darkest thoughts are composable and we can really make epic songs out of these? Dialectic, in the sense here, equaling I feel X and I want Y. That's the power meets containment. That's the thing that we talk about all the time. This is our own sort of self are we strong enough to contain those urges? If not, do they leak all over the place and affect other aspects of ourselves and our personality? That question itself is answered by PrecisionCycle for sure because of our 7-dimensional components. But Terry Date presents a very clear example of what DBT looks like. If we go back and listen to that album, because we're not addressing the core wounds, we're just addressing the need to shift perspective through whatever components and devices we may have. That then leads us to Dave Jerden. Jerden is a guy who we are going to label the humanistic nihilist. If you're not familiar with, he worked a lot with Alice in Chains, a lot with Stone Temple Pilots. And if you know anything about those two bands, you know they are known for frontmen who are heavily troubled, extremely talented. They were known for guitar players that transcended their abilities of the genre. And they are known for a musicianship that is unparalleled and unrivaled oftentimes in their ability to produce sonic masterpieces. Jazz musicians and blues musicians take years to incorporate. They're able to do this innately into rock and roll songs. These are the types of bands of players that are in these bands. Dave Jerden, able to come in and apply a very humanistic, nihilist perspective to produce songs like Rooster, right? Wood type thing. The swagger is in the armor here, is the delivery here. The collapse is the performance. Seeing Scott Weiland up there killing himself, seeing Lane Staley up there emaciated with parts of gangrene on his body because he's run out of places to input syringe inputs. This is Dave Jerden, the ultimate understanding that therapy doesn't fix you, so let's just try to have a good time on the way out. This reminds me of an instructor I had in training. Private practice was a humanistic practitioner who would often tell us stories about how he would go out with clients and he would be their wingman, or he would introduce one client to another because he felt they would be good fits for some type of social engagement or business dealing. And we could talk about the ethics of that per the APA and our training all we want. And we did, because we always had a lot of questions about whether those things were ethically allowed by the American Psychological Association. This particular practitioner never really had a problem. It had never been challenged by clients. So I'm assuming that perspective works. But we see how this humanistic perspective starts to allow for boundaries to be crossed and blurred, frameworks to be misconstrued at times, to be evolving documents rather than hard absolutes. We see the blurred lines between therapists and subjects, in this case, between producers, engineers, and their talent. And what we get from that are these very great sounding, full of pain type of songs, which also document collapse in real time and see how the person is just offloading ego dystonia so that they can survive another day. That is the humanistic nihilist in a nutshell. Someone who is willing to say, you know what? It is what it is. People are disturbed, but they still deserve to have a good time. And who am I to call them out on their bad behavior? Yeah, that's a take. And there's definitely money to be made in that perspective. Again, none of these are, I'm saying, are good or bad. They are indicative of psychodynamic styles that are very clearly presented in the marketplace today. And if you want to know what they're like, just go back and listen to some of these albums. Putting it all together with this framework, this is the real mental health curriculum. Gen X got, Gen Z is still using it. This is the real primer for nervous system recalibration, right? We see the imaginary presented in Vig, the symbolic in O'Brien, the real with Albini, the dialectic with Date, the mythic with Rubin, and the implosion that occurs with Jerden. And these were delivered to us via KROQ, via these very curated shows that were put together by great talent like Sluggo, Poor Man, Jed the Fish, and I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of other really talented, Ricky Rackman when he was there, guys that really helped shape the sound. But as we take into consideration the words we're saying here, As we look at the way that music presented in the 90s, grunge rock was delivered, we see that we've been living inside of a blueprint. These producers mapped the unconscious, and they did it with tape, not textbooks. Just go listen to In Utero, and you'll probably get a sense of what real trauma and trauma process looks like. You don't have to go read Bruce Fink. Just go listen to Surfer Rosa, and you're going to understand what real human collapse looks like when the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary are all crossed up. And these are the things I hope that I have brought light to today in this presentation. This has been a passion project, and I'm sure that I didn't really get to everyone that I wanted to the way that I wanted to. I just wanted to present today the outlines for perhaps what may be a bigger video essay on psychodynamic that is in plain sight and the differences in what we can expect when we do enter that, seek services. These are things that have been soothing our soul from the very beginning. If any of these albums really work for you, I encourage you to align yourself with one of those modalities, because it's probably something that is aligned with your central nervous system. But if you want to take all of that and put it into one master production, then come to PrecisionCycle. We're able to tap into what Butch Vig, Steve Albini, Rick Rubin, Terry Date does, and what Brendan O'Brien does, and what Jerden does, and put that all together utilizing modern technology, so that rather than having this fragmented sense of self, you can actually have this symphony of brilliant sound that is self-integration, self-wellness, self-actualization that PrecisionCycle can give you. 7-dimensional factors, domains, which we measure, which we can deliver on a weekly basis. This cuts through all of those different types of fragments and really gives you a holistic view, 360 view of your personality. There are elements that are innate and we can tap into, and ways that we can express the pain offloaded, but still work on the bigger meanings of why it's there and predict how it will appear. That's all in PrecisionCycle. These producers set the stage for us to understand how human dynamics, how psychodynamics work, how they operate. Let's take that knowledge and our appreciation of the music and really go forward in finding ways to make ourselves, align ourselves with our mental health goals, are able to express pain, but at the same time reconcile it and manage it. Thank you very much for the past half hour. I've really appreciated being able to have this discussion and have this passion project come to light. Again, it's hopefully the foundation for a bigger video essay to come. If anything I talked to today has moved you and you want to sort of work with someone that sees the world the way that I do, utilizing the methods that I utilize, reach out, email Enrique at elevateepo.com, elevate.epo on Instagram and Facebook, Elevate EPO on Twitter and YouTube, and now PrecisionCycle TV on YouTube. We're also on TikTok, so make sure you look for us there. We'd love to get your DMs and see if PrecisionCycle is something that can help you reach your goals for 2026. Thank you very much to everyone who has downloaded the podcast. We cannot do any of this without you. Thank you. Even the simplest act of downloading a podcast really helps out. We appreciate all your help. Hope that you'll continue to tune in and support us throughout our channels. We'll be back next week for 3 episodes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as well as an inaugural introduction to Game by Eros, a new offering by Elevate.epo, which helps us with understanding relationships and dating dynamics. Be sure to tune in for that. Until then, this has been great. Thank you very much for the time. Remember, all of this has been for entertainment purposes, not here to diagnose anybody, because we're not therapists, we're not coaches, we're beyond therapy here at Elevate.epo. Thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we are able to speak again.